Hey guys, so for the rest of this chapter, 9.4 and 9.5, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations when it doesn't work out perfectly with numbers that factor. Okay, so everything we've done so far are actually the easy ones when they factor. This is what happens when you get weird numbers that doesn't quite do that. So I'm going to teach you two different ways to do this. First way, 9.4, is called completing the square. As you see, look, completing the square. So our goal here is to solve these things by completing the square. Now this is the process of if you are better at memorizing a procedure, memorizing steps, individual small little steps, then this is going to be your favorite way to solve this. So if you look at these 6 steps, okay, move the c over to the right, divide everything by a, cut b in half and square it, add that number to both sides, factor the left side, and then square it and solve. All right, if you're better at memorizing those things, those little steps, then you're going to like completing the square. If you're better at memorizing formulas, you're going to like what we do next section, which is the exact same thing, but just cramming it all into one complex formula. Okay, so really you get to make the decision here on which you prefer. I'll show you how to do both, and I'll kind of teach you when it's best to use each method to help you just be as fast and efficient as possible. Okay, so the first thing we need to do here is just figure out how to complete the square, what that completing the square means. All right, so what we're just going to do is we're just going to do the completing the square part, which is just like step 3. Step 3 in this is completing the square part. Okay, what we want is we want to factor these to be a perfect square. Okay, so for this first one, right, you're trying to figure out what c is supposed to be. All right, in order to do that, what you're going to do is you're going to cut b in half. B is 10. Cut that in half, which is 5, and then square that number. So 5 squared is 25. So c equals 25. That's what we want. Okay? Now here's the reason we do that. I'll show you why we do it. This would just be the answer, right? In this case, you would just stop right there. But the reason we do that is because this becomes x squared plus 10x plus 25, right? And that is going to factor perfectly. If you think about what multiplies to 25 and adds to 10, you're going to get 5 and 5. So it's going to factor perfectly to x plus 5 quantity squared. All right, x plus 5 times x plus 5. That's why we're doing it. But all you guys have to do is tell me what c is going to be in each of these cases. So cut b in half and square it. All right. So in the second one, all right, you cut -4 in half, you get -2. And then -2 squared is -2 times -2, which is positive 4. So c equals positive 4. All right. Now when you have a positive 4 there, you'll be able to factor that to x minus 2 times x minus 2, which is x minus 2 quantity squared. Okay, that's how it's going to work out. All right, number 3 and 4, it's a little bit tougher. All right, so when you have even numbers, it's really easy because they cut in half very easily. All right, but when you don't have that, like here in number 3, all right, you've got to cut 5 in half. All right, well, 5 cut in half is just 5 divided by 2. Okay, so what I need to square is 5 divided by 2, half of 5. All right, which is the same as 2.5, but it's easier to work with fractions and decimals because 2.5 squared, I can't do 2.5 times 2.5 in my head. That breaks my brain in half. All right, but 5 halves squared, you just square the top and square the bottom. Okay, so square the top 5 squared is 25, and square the bottom, that's 4. Okay, so 25 over 4 is what c would have to be here. All right, you're cutting b in half and then squaring it every time. So number 4, we're going to cut -3 in half. Going to get -3 over 2. Okay, square that to figure out what c's got to be. All right, so we're going to square that, square the top. -3 times -3 is positive 9. Remember, it doesn't matter if it's negative or positive. When you square it, it's going to come back to positive. And then 2 times 2 is 4. So 9 divided by 4. Okay, let's place this in context now. So the whole point of this is we're going to try to solve these things by completing the square. Okay, we're going to give exact answers here, so we're going to use what you just learned on Wednesday, how to reduce radicals. All right, and 3 and 4, I'm going to show you how to use the calculator to do these things. Okay, so number 1. All right, we're going to solve this by completing the square. So I'm following those 6 steps. You're going to want to refer back to those if you don't have them memorized. All right, you first set this up by getting everything to one side of the equation. Okay, so subtract over the 2x and the 1. So x squared minus 2x minus 1 equals 0. Now before you do anything else, you always want to check to see if you can factor, because if you can factor this, then that's what we're going to want to do, right? But there's nothing that multiplies to -1 and adds to -2. It just doesn't work that way, all right? Because the only thing that multiplies to -1 is -1 and +1, right? So that obviously isn't going to add to -2. So because we can't factor, now we're going to start this completing the square process. All right, the first step is to move c over. C is our constant, so that's the -1. We're going to add that over. So x squared minus 2x. I'm going to leave a space to complete the square, and I've got a 1. Okay, so yeah, it was kind of redundant. I moved the 1 over and then I moved it back over. Right, but it's always good to check factoring because it's just a lot faster. Second step is to divide everything by a. That's the coefficient in front of the x squared. So if you had a number there, like we'll see down here at number 4, you would divide everything by that number. Right? This one doesn't have that, so we're good. We can skip step 2. Right? Step 3 is cut b in half and square it. Okay, so b here is negative 2. We cut that in half. Negative 2 cut in half is negative 1. Right? We square negative 1, just like we did back on the first page. Negative 1 squared is plus 1, so I add 1 here to complete the square. Right? The whole point of that is now I'm going to be able to factor that side to x minus 1, x minus 1. Right? But you have to remember, as step 4 says, right, whenever I add something to one side of this equation, I have to do the same to the other side. So if I add a 1 over here, which I just did, I have to also add a 1 on the other side of the equation. Okay? Now, when we get here, step 5 is then to factor the left side. It's going to come out to a perfect square. So ask yourself what multiplies to positive 1, adds negative 2. You should come up with x minus 1 and x minus 1. It always works that way. That it's going to be whatever this thing that you squared was, whatever half of this number is, whatever that was, that's what this number is always going to be. Okay, it works that way every time. All right, and then I just simplified the 1 plus 1 on the right side. Okay, now to finish this, the very last step is to square root both sides and solve for x. Okay, so in order to get rid of that square, I'm trying to get x by itself, I need to get rid of the squared, so I'm going to square root both sides. It cancels out that square root and that square. Alright, so on the left I just have x minus 1. On the right side, now I have a root 2, but when you take the square root of something, you have to add a plus or minus, okay? Because plus or minus, root 2 is going to multiply out to 2. Okay, so it's going to be plus or minus. You use that little symbol, just a plus on top of a minus sign, square root of 2. Alright, and the last step is to add that 1 over, right? Trying to get x by itself. So I add the 1 over, and I get the answer as 1 plus or minus square root of 2. That's the answer. Okay, so think of the reason why you have the plus or minus as when we factored, we always had 2 answers, right? So because we need to have 2 answers, we have a plus answer and a minus answer. Right? Now, if that root 2 reduced at all, like a root 20 or something like that, then you would reduce it. But root 2 doesn't reduce, so you just leave it just like that. Right? Obviously, I understand this is tough. Right? You might want to rewatch this video a couple times just to make sure you understand these steps and how they work. Okay? Okay, on number 2. All right, you'd start by adding the 8 over and seeing if you could factor. All right, we don't need to do that because I'm telling you it doesn't factor. All right, but you would always start that way. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to go right into completing the square. Now c is already moved over. That's already moved over. So I'm just going to rewrite this, but leave a space to complete the square. Okay. And now I'm going to complete the square. All right. The way we complete the square is because we don't have to divide by an a because there's no coefficient in front of the x squared. All right. So now we cut b in half. Cut 10 in half. It's 5, and square both sides. All right. When you square 5, you get 25. So I'm finishing that with a 25, just like we did in number 1 on the first page. All right, but if I add 25 to one side, I have to do the same to the other side. So I'm going to add a 25 on the other side as well. Okay, now x squared plus 10x plus 25, we know is always going to factor. All right, 2 things that multiply to 25 add to 10 are 5 and 5. So it's x plus 5, quantity squared, equals negative 8 plus 25 comes out to 17. All right, so now we just square root and solve. Square root both sides. Cancels out the squared, x plus 5 equals plus or minus root 17. Don't forget the plus or minus happens every time you square root something in an equation, you add a plus or minus. Subtract that 5 over, we get x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 17. Bam! That's how it's done. All right, that 17 doesn't reduce, so you just leave it the way it is. Okay, 2 more examples of this. Number 3, number 4, we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. Number 3, I put a tough one in here because we got an odd b. Right, we've got c already moved over. I'm telling you it's not going to factor. Okay, so we've got x squared minus 3x. Leave a space to complete the square, and 3. Okay, so I have to cut 3 in half. I get negative 3 halves, and then square both sides. Square the top, so square 3 to get 9. Square the halves, square the 2 on the bottom, and we get 4. Just the same way. If you aren't familiar on how to do that, go back to number 4 on the last page because we already did this one. Okay, but if I add 9/4 to that side, I need to also add 9/4 to the other side. Crazy, I know. Okay, now like I said, this is where the factoring comes in. Okay, you don't need to actually factor this because I told you that it's always going to be whatever this half of this number is going to be what's going to be on the inside. Okay, so the way this factors is x minus 3 halves. Whatever you squared is going to be on the inside of your factoring. Okay, and equals, right, 3 plus 9/4, you should be able to do this. Right, 3, don't think of it as 3, think of it as 12 over 4 to get a common denominator. 12 plus 9 is 21, and the 4 stays the same. Okay, finish this up, square root both sides. Cancels out. X minus 3 halves equals square plus or minus the square root of 21. Alright, the way you square root a fraction, you square at the top, so square root of 21. Alright, and you square at the bottom, square root of 4. But we know what square root of 4 is. Square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so it's plus or minus square root of 21 over 2. Now that 21 doesn't reduce, so you just leave the radical the way it is. Alright, add the 3 halves over, and we get 3 halves plus or minus square root of 21 over 2. Now in this case, that's the exact answer, right, like we had up top. In this case, it tells us to round to the nearest hundredth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the calculator, handy dandy calculator. Right, and I'm going to put in 1.5 or 3 halves, and I'm going to add root 21 over 2. Okay, so we've got root 21. Root 21 should come out to about 4.58. Divide that by 2. I need to add that to 1.5. Right, and I get a 3.79 is the positive one. Right, I did the positive one first. So I did 3 halves plus root 21 over 2. I got 3.79. Okay, and then I need to do 1.5 minus root 21 over 2. And in this case, I get negative 0.79. Right, those are the two answers that I get. Okay. Now for number 4, right, now in this case, I have to just follow the whole process because I've got an A on the front. Right, so because of that, I'm going to actually have to divide by the A. So I'm going to have to do step 2. All right, what I'm going to start with is move the C over. All right, so add that 18 over. We get 3g squared plus 12g. Leave a space, equals 18. Divide everything by 3. Cancels. G squared plus 4g, leave a space, equals 18 over 3 is 6. Okay, now complete the square. Cut 4 in half and square it. Cut 4 in half, you get 2. 2 squared is 4. Add 4 to both sides. Boom. Then I need to factor on the left. All right, factor that. Two things that multiply to 4 and add to 4 are 2 and 2. So g plus 2, quantity squared. Notice it's the thing that I squared when I cut that 4 in half, equals 10. Square root both sides. G plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. All right, I squared both sides. Bam, bam, bam. And subtract 2. G equals negative 2 plus or minus root 10. That's the exact answer, but in this case I want the actual nearest hundredth. So I'm going to do negative 2 plus root 10. I need to do that in the calculator. Negative 2 plus root 10 is 1.16. Round to the nearest hundredth. And the second one is negative 2 minus root 10. That one comes out to 5.16. Negative 5.16, sorry. 0.16. Boom. That's how you complete the square, baby.